Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Less Waste, More Impact. I'm Vanessa Barnes from the Restaurant and Catering Australia, and I'm so glad you've joined us for what promises to be a very powerful and practical session today. Today's conversation is all about flipping the script on waste in food service. Let's face it, waste isn't just about what goes in the bin. It's costing businesses time, money, and opportunity. And in 2025, with rising costs and rising expectations, we can't afford to treat sustainability as a nice to have anymore. So today we're diving into how to cut waste and create real value with tools you can actually take back to your teams. Just solid thinking from someone who knows this space inside and out. And I think that that's a very good segue to now introduce you to Mike Twemlow, Manager of Circular Economy at Edge Impact. How did I go with your last name? Was it really bad?
Pronounced it similar to how most people do. It's a tongue twister.
How do you pronounce your last name?
Twemlow.
Twemlow, there you go. So Mike is the Manager of Circular Economy at Edge Impact, and I'm not too sure if everybody on the webinar today is familiar with Edge Impact, but you certainly will be by the end of today's webinar. Mike is one of the leading experts in practical sustainability solution. He's worked with hospitality businesses, both big and small, and brings real world experience to the table. Today, Mike will walk us through what the circular economy actually means for food service, the most common waste pitfalls we see in kitchens and venues, and success stories that prove small changes do make a big difference. So, Mike, it's over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Hi everyone, and thanks for that kind introduction. I've been at Edge for 6 years. We're a broad spectrum sustainability consultancy, and I fit within the circular economy team, which is all about waste and materials. And over the many years that I've been here, I've supported small to medium-sized hospitality businesses across New South Wales and Australia. Primarily through a program called Bin Trim, and over the years I've probably visited close to 1,500 businesses and to provide them with support through waste assessments. And so what I'll be running through today is trying to demystify what the concept of circular economy is and how it applies to the food services industry. And why it matters as well. So how it can actually bring you value by cutting costs and also potentially bringing in a focus with some of your customers. So I got a little deck that I'll share that just has some images I can talk to, and we'll get started. So what is the circular economy? It's probably best summed up in, and I suppose a good way to look at it is through this graph on the right-hand side. And the way that we currently operate is under a linear economy where we essentially source the materials, and in this case, say food or packaging. Oftentimes it's coming from overseas or halfway across the country. It's produced in a factory, it's sold, it's used, and then it ends up as waste and most of the time in landfill. The circular economy is trying to intervene along these points to try and encourage recycling, refurbishment, reuse where possible, and repair. And I'll get into how this is sort of relevant to hospitality and food. But essentially, waste is we don't like to sort of look and refer to waste as instead we try and look at it as a material, and that waste equals money lost and as well as an environmental impact. And so hospitality has a number of different challenges with the fast turnover of food. We have a very big single-use and takeaway packaging culture in Australia compared to places like Europe, where takeaway packaging is very uncommon. It's always eating in. So there's a real high potential to try and intervene and change the way that we what packaging we are using, what food services we are procuring, how they're being used, and optimized in your kitchens before they end up as waste. So I just also pulled together a little snapshot from the R&CA annual report, where sustainability was a really the second ranked most important point that the R&C members were concerned about. So we'll talk to that as well. But why it's important, not only for your business's bottom line and for the planet, but also from a policy point of view across the national, federal government, state government, and local government. There are a lot of changes associated with circular economy and particularly waste. From a landfill point of view, we are fast approaching running out of room in our landfill. Sydney is going to run out of room in its landfill close to 2028, so a few years away. Many areas along the mid-north coast of New South Wales have already run out of space. So Coffs Harbour for several years now has been shipping all their landfill up to Queensland because they just don't have any room anymore. So it's a really pressing issue, our sort of disposal culture of throwing everything into landfill. There are a lot of federal plans and strategies and frameworks that have been released in the last 2 years that are really aiming to try and drive change, as well as state-based drivers. As an example, New South Wales has implemented mandatory food waste recycling legislation between 2026 and 2030 that will be released. As an example, 2026, all shopping centres, Coles and Woolies, pubs and clubs will be required to have an operating organic service, and there'll be major fines for non-compliance, and that'll slowly increase up to 2028, where all businesses will have to have a organics recycling service. And that's also happening with councils across New South Wales, as well as the other states as well. So there's a lot of grants out there at the moment, and there's a lot of impending legislation around trying to drive better source separation. So we are minimizing the amount of stuff that we are sending to landfill, and organics are a really important one, just purely from the environmental impact associated with organics ending up in landfill, which is not a great thing, and I'll get into that. So some common challenges, and I'm very, very aware of all of them from visiting the number of businesses, and also previously in my 20s operating and working in the hospitality sector. So I can definitely appreciate the challenges that small businesses are up against, whether it's staff retention, where you're sourcing your food from, waste costs, time and energy. All of these things add up to making waste something that's often left to the last minute, and something that is not really considered as potentially as much as it should be, particularly when it can save you money if it's done correctly. So a lot of things that we see is when there's over ordering or poor stock rotation that leads to food spoilage, a lack of bins or a lack of recycling streams, or a lack of understanding of what goes where from staff members leads to contamination and higher waste costs. Confusion around packaging, like what is the best packaging that you can procure. Takeaway packaging is a part of Australian food culture, and how can you best set yourself up for that? Oftentimes there isn't staff accountability, because a lot of the time bin rooms and bins sort of are put in the back room, so there's not a lot of understanding about what actually happens back there, and general lack of understanding and knowledge as well around what goes where, what can and can't be recycled. It's quite confusing out there, and there's not a lot of certainty. This is this image on the right here is just a typical waste profile. So this is from the New South Wales EPA of their bin audits that they do at hospitality venues, and you can see up to 60% of the general waste is of food waste, and food waste is particularly problematic in the general waste, really because it's so heavy and you're being charged by weight of your general waste collections, but also by collection. So if you could remove 60% of your general waste, reduce that frequency, there's a lot of cost saving opportunities there by weight, but also by collection. Not to mention the other recyclables like paper and cardboard that are often found in the bins. And we've done around around 180 sites in this last year that we visited, and can definitely reiterate that that's generally what we find when we do bin assessments and have a look at what's happening. And here's just some example images from sites that we visited where, there's a lot of organics, there's a lot of paper and cardboard, and opportunities for improvements. So what are some sort of practical wins to start? Some things, and I'll get into some case studies later that we've had where there's been some great success around optimizing your menus. So better, less waste, better prep control, portion control as well is another big thing that we work closely with a business on. Noting and encouraging your staff to note when they are collecting meals back from customers, what are things that are most often left on the plate. Chips are a great example of things that are often overserved. Setting up back of house bin stations, so actually reaching out to your waste contractor and asking for additional services so that you can recycle and separate effectively. That's also important because as we get closer to landfill capacity, these landfill levies, which is a cost per tonne, will continually increase year on year, and they have just gone up again across all states and will continue to do so year on year. So it'll increasingly get more expensive to throw things away in the general waste as the government try and incentivise better recycling practices. So really setting yourself up for success now will only benefit you in the long run as well from a bottom line. Packaging. So I know packaging is often something that's sort of front and center because it's often, something that we consume every day. And there's a lot of confusion around what packaging is best, and especially with the prevalence of compostable packaging, which at the moment in states like New South Wales, Victoria, and investigations in Western Australia and Tasmania, that is actually banned from being composted, purely because the governments did investigations into the packaging and found that it contained heavy metals and these chemicals called forever chemicals, or PFAS, where the compostable packaging, and PFAS is a chemical that's widely used. It's sort of like a grease repellent, water repellent type chemical, but it doesn't break down, and it's highly carcinogenic. So the EPA and the Victorian EPA have flat out banned compostable packaging just because they found that all the compostable packaging, I think 90+% that they surveyed, had these problematic chemicals within them, which we don't want in our food system, let alone our bodies. So compostable packaging, while it was originally touted as something that would be a really great solution, and I know you often see single-use coffee cups that are compostable now, or those sort of like the fibre-based bowls that are often used. Unfortunately, they are not a solution at the moment that we could be thinking about. So in the next slide, I'll go into a little bit more detail around packaging, but essentially we really want to try and replicate what they're doing in Europe as much as possible in terms of that dine-in culture. I think if you can encourage people to dine in where possible and using reusables, I know that's not a realistic opportunity in a lot of cases. That's sort of the best from an environmental perspective. And then when you do have to use packaging, I'll share some tips and tricks. And oftentimes it's great to set up a really a positive relationship with your suppliers and ask these pointy questions about what's best. I will just share a little video to give you sort of an idea of what I mean from an environmental perspective, which is this one. And there won't be any sound, but essentially it's trying to show the difference between takeaway versus reusables in the energy, water, and environmental impact associated with it. So on the left here is reusables being used over and over again, and the right here is an example of where we're sourcing and the process of sourcing these paper-based food packaging. Oftentimes it's coming from overseas in places like Southeast Asia, shipped over to Australia, unpacked, delivered, sent, and then used, where you just eat quickly and then throw it away in the bin where it ends up in landfill. So I feel like this is a really powerful way to understand the processes associated with single-use packaging, and also the challenge that we all face operating in sort of this linear economy, and how difficult it is, particularly in Australia, where we've set up this takeaway sort of culture to encourage reusable. So that one was from the French government, I believe, but a good little video. And so with recyclable packaging, we have some information that I'll share after this around. And first and foremost, I would just say to avoid compostable packaging if you can for now, and try and prioritize recyclable packaging. And what that means is really simple, clear plastic packaging or paper and cardboard packaging that can end up in the paper and cardboard bin. And prioritizing reusable. So, and if you do have any questions on this as well throughout this whole presentation, feel free to jump in, or if you have questions at the end, I can go into a little bit more detail, but I'll share some information and resources after this as well. So back to food waste and organics. In this space, we sort of classify there's three types of food waste. There's the prep waste, which is any waste from preparing meals. So when things are being prepped in the morning in the kitchens, offcuts, carrot peels or potato peels, any unused produce, that's what we classify as prep waste. Plate waste is self-explanatory, anything that's left over from customers, and spoilage is anything that has expired and can't be used in the kitchen. How do we sort of address this? Best practice recycling would involve trying to set up things like benchtop organic bins, or bins like in this photo here, somewhere in the kitchen. And I know that can be quite challenging in some spaces where space is a premium and you have sort of maximize the space that you're working with. And oftentimes it will mean sort of swapping out a general waste bin for an organics bin if you can get one. There are these compostable liners that are often used. They're the green liners that you might see at dog parks. And oftentimes they're used because to minimize the need to wash out and clean the bins that you're putting all the food waste into, and that you can just easily tie it up and throw it in the bin. Signage is a really great way to try and encourage staff to do the right thing. Just clear colours. Waste contractors will have this signage, local councils have this signage, and you can always ask them for the signage that they have on hand so that you can print it out and stick it above the areas where your bins are, or on the bins, just to reiterate a point. And that way you can try and capture these different types of food waste. So this example is great for prep waste, where you're have a bin that's wheeled into the spot, captures everything that you're not using. For plate waste, you do one where the staff are coming back in with the plates before they're placing them in the dishwasher, somewhere where they can scrape it off easily. And spoilage as well is probably more of an ad hoc thing. And if spoilage is common, it could be a great opportunity to look into other avenues or methods of ordering and also using food. And I'll share some examples of some case studies too. So yeah, I think the first steps really to reducing waste costs is contacting your waste provider. And that might be through a particular company, or it might be through a council service, and requesting and understanding what other services you can get. And I think at a minimum, you should have general waste, paper and cardboard, and the yellow bin. And as we get closer towards in the next few years, when the legislation continually ramps up, it'll be more of, and this is also dependent on location, but if you're in a metropolitan area, food waste services are readily available in every state, and would highly encourage you to investigate what that would look like for you, what costs are associated with the bin collections, how you could optimize it within your site, to minimize the amount of general waste and therefore the general waste collections that you are getting. So the idea would be to increase recycling services, reduce general waste collection frequencies or bin sizes, so that you can end up saving money. Setting up those bins successfully in the kitchen and in the front of house, upskilling and training staff to understand what goes where. Be good to request waste reports to be able to understand what your recycling rates are, and then see what the savings can be in the long run. Before I go into the next slide on behaviour change, I'll just share this case study that we worked with they are a sort of like a New York style restaurant, like lots of burgers and pizzas. And they initially had a recycling rate of around 25 to 30%. They introduced a yellow bin and an organics bin, and they increased their recycling rate to 80%, around 80%. And they, over a year, were able to save up to 30% of their outgoing costs, just through better stock management, but also waste management. So I just saw that question and I'll get to that one. They changed some of their menus to be more concise. They were making their food daily to avoid spoilage. They had to educate employees, because if you don't educate employees, it's oftentimes that, business as usual will continue. So general waste will still be placed in the, they'll be still being placed in the general waste. An interesting one they were looking at is trying to combine waste collections with neighbouring businesses. So if you do have, you are in an area where there are restaurants and cafes nearby, talking to them about what their understanding is, if they have any interest in an organic service or recycling service, and that way you can reduce the costs across both of your collections. And then they were also reusing vegetables and meat offcuts as much as they could, whether that's through stocks or incorporating those offcuts into other meals. And Max, that's a great question. And I also remember being in Japan, and sort of what I was going to touch on in this one, particularly this point about why it's so difficult to change our behavior. So you are correct. I was also in Japan, and I think they have upwards of like 8 or 9 recycling streams, all the way to having, each type of plastic even had its own recycling bin. And everyone followed the instructions to a T. There was no sort of pushback, and in Australia it's often very different, and for some reason we find it quite difficult to change these simple things. And it is getting to the point, Max, where the government will be implementing fines. So for New South Wales as an example, it will be a legislative, so it will be by law a requirement to have a food waste service that is operating, and the local councils will be policing that. So they'll have staff members going out to food businesses and auditing to see if they have a organic service, a recycling service, and if they don't, they'll be handing out fines. So that's in the long run, and that, as I said initially, for New South Wales, 2026 is just for the big supermarkets, shopping centres, pubs and clubs, big pubs and clubs, and then it'll continually increase, and by 2028, all small businesses will be required to have one, pending your location. And that's just a New South Wales example, and generally the other states follow suit. So there will be fines, which is what it's had to come to, unfortunately, in Australia, where we find it difficult to change behaviours. Paper and cardboard is something that's been around for a long time, and I think a lot of people, really understand that if you have a cardboard or paper, that it goes in the blue bin. And hopefully that's what it'll get to in the long run, where it does become a cultural change that we all know that food goes in the green bin. But for the most part, we're a long way from that, unfortunately. And so, yeah, what we've learnt over the years is that people, particularly in Australia, follow clear systems. Signage, colour and simplicity really encourages the right practices. Culture shift comes from the top. So butter, that previous example I shared, the owner was really passionate about this and was really driving change from the top. There's no doubt people probably within your business who are interested and inspired by being more sustainable or focusing on reducing their impact on the environment. And they're people that you can really try and empower to lead and take this and their inspiration to make change and sort of let them run with it. Involving staff in any sort of changes that you do make. So if you are introducing more bins in your kitchen or in the back of house, making sure that they're all across it, what their perspectives are, if they think that's the right place for it, talking to them about what would make it work best, celebrating wins that you do have, and then a big one in the hospitality space, probably more than any other industry, is just staff turnover. It can be so frustrating to train up a staff member, get everyone on board, and then within 6 months there's a whole new staff within the business. So it's a really tough space to try and embed change, but hopefully with the onset of councils introducing organic services around the country, that it'll become more second nature to separate organics particularly. And so the other case study I wanted to share was on a club in Sydney called the Tattersalls Club. They reduced the amount of food waste they had by 30% purely by menu design and upcycling offcuts. So as I mentioned before, they noted that their waste bills were really high and were sort of a significant challenge for them on a monthly basis. So they used a period of around 2 months to encourage staff to record common items that were coming back on the plates that were uneaten, and then assess whether it's worth minimizing the amount that they were serving or removing that particular item altogether. They were also, for those meals that were coming back not completely finished, they were reducing portion sizes, offering things as add-ons rather than, as an example, for if they were serving a burger, the chips would be an add-on rather than a part of the meal. They were reusing meat and vegetable offcuts in their kitchen, so they would have stocks going on particular prep days. They introduced food waste bins as well. And their sort of key learnings was it's all about finding the motivation for you. For them, it was financial initially, but then they found over time that it sort of created this great environment within the team. And the team sort of felt more empowered and were brought along for the journey as well. Change making, they stated that it only takes one person to spark a positive change, and that one person was really motivated to focus on organics. And facilitation, as I mentioned in the previous slide, training is really important in any change that you make in operations related to your business, to make sure everyone's on board. And that can be said about waste, but it can also be said about all aspects within a hospitality business as well. So training is super important. So I think I'll pause there, Vanessa, and I know you wanted to have more of an informal chat, and then we can go into some questions, or if there's any questions now as well, happy to answer them.
Thank you. That was, it kind of was so insightful that it really did cover a lot of where I was thinking of deep diving. And thank you so much, Mike. That was really, really insightful. So the whole role of sustainability and preventing the issues that you had highlighted during your presentation, it can be quite overwhelming for a business operator when you're looking at the whole pie. Where would be a good place to start if you were to start chipping away and perhaps having a sustainability plan? But where would you suggest starting so that there could be impact made straight away?
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely appreciate that I probably just blurted out a lot of information around sustainability, waste and circular economy. So I am definitely open to answering any questions. And I do think that when you are sort of starting this journey, to just focus on one particular thing. And as I sort of highlighted in this particular case study, it can be very individual to the business and finding out what their motivation is. If, for instance, a business is here and they're wanting to find out how that they can reduce their outgoings, I think focusing on waste is a really great avenue to try and reduce that, because through waste you can understand operational and supply chain inefficiencies that you might have. So by looking in, seeing what's ending up in the general waste, and it's a real powerful exercise to just go at the end of the day or at the end of a shift and have a look what's in the general waste bins to be able to understand where the opportunities lie. You can quite easily start to understand that, there's quite a lot of spoiled food in here that we could have used through a better efficient ordering system, or these are actually things that we can't resolve through looking upstream. Let's have a look at a recycling service and try and get the paper and cardboard out of this bin, the organics out of this bin, and all these plastics. And once you begin the journey, you start to sort of unravel further opportunities, and that could then lead to working with suppliers who are better suited to your organization and your goals around efficient ordering, the materials that they're using, the packaging that they're using. So I'd say probably focusing on just trying to understand what's ending up in your landfill bins at the moment is a great place to start, because that is going to increasingly get more and more costly. And if you can reduce that, it often opens up a window into opportunities to improve, upstream as well as downstream. So looking up into your supply chain, at what types of food you're ordering, looking into your menus, how they can be improved, and then obviously looking at how you can better manage waste as well in-house.
And when we're an industry that we have we have a lot of challenges around staff shortages and the pressures that come with just running a business, how do businesses find out more about the supply chain when they're actually trying to buy to one supplier as opposed to using a conglomerate of different suppliers?
Yeah, it's actually probably the biggest challenge, I'd say, because it's often, like you said, there's such a big challenge with staff and with time availability, and oftentimes you're reliant on what you're hearing from your supplier to be sort of true and accurate, and you might not have time to be able to go to a different conglomerate or reaching out to other suppliers and understanding what their offering is. So it's a really tricky space, and I wouldn't say that there's a silver bullet to that answer, other than trying to, I suppose, similar to when you start looking into general waste, when you start looking into these types of things, oftentimes it's kind of like a bug that you can't, that you catch, and you're constantly interested in trying to do better. And I'd say it's all about probably research and understanding and resources, existing resources that are out there. There are a lot of useful resources in the food industry, whether it's government funded or association funded, purely because it's it is such a challenging industry to operate in when you are trying to find time to look into these things. So there are resources out there that can help you try and target your supply chain and the suppliers that you're working with, which we can share as well. But
Yeah,
it is a tricky one.
that would be really helpful. But I do have to say that in regards to the supply chain, there has been a lot of work on their behalf and taking responsibility of their role when it comes to, lowering across the board. They've got statements now and dedicated web pages in terms of what they're doing as a business to meet the demands. I mean, just to hear you say that, like with Tweed Heads, that they've now started to take all of their food waste to Queensland because they have nowhere now that they can dispose of their food waste. That's horrifying.
Yeah, it is. It is a scary thought, and it's a great point that you raised. There is a lot of, I spoke about the legislation in New South Wales to target food waste, but at a federal level, there's legislation coming to target packaging, and all these food service suppliers who are sending out products and packaging, they'll be legislated and legally obliged to report on their packaging, and also they'll be eventually charged for the packaging that they're putting on market. So at the moment, the way that our world works is that any packaging from a product or a food that you as a business or as an individual buy, the cost of managing the waste associated with that product falls on the business or on the councils to manage. So, ordering things from Amazon, you end up with the packaging that comes with the product. And at the moment, it's your responsibility to deal with that. And the legislation coming is trying to put that cost back on the business so that they will then start to really think about the packaging that they're using so that it's more recyclable, removing unnecessary packaging that doesn't need to be there in the first place. So it's trying to reduce that overall burden on businesses and individuals and councils in the long run. So there is sort of, in the long term, there will be positive changes from that'll be forced on these bigger businesses. And like you said, out of necessity, but also out of desire, they're also really interested in trying to minimize their impact as much as they can, some more than others.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very it's when you go overseas and you see the way that Europe in particular, the way that they are their responsibility in the way of sustainability is quite admirable. And then, you come back and you do realize just how much work we do have to do here, and we really need to start taking action. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask Mike?
Hey, yeah, sorry, Sharon here. I've just got a question about, I know Cronulla, I'm here in Sydney, Western Sydney. Cronulla treatment plant have a FOGO food cogen program where they convert food waste to electricity.
Yeah.
Do a lot of other utilities around Australia do a similar project to collect food waste?
Yeah, so out in Western Sydney, there's a place called Earth Power, actually. And that's an anaerobic digestion facility. I was there last month, and it's like two big tanks where they essentially receive all the food waste from businesses, and it's removed all the contamination, and they put it into these tanks where microbes break it down. It releases gas that is then captured, and I can't remember the amount of homes that they're powering off this plant, but it's quite significant. So that's sort of the end goal, that we have these plants. The other thing is the byproduct is a fertilizer that is then sold back to industry and applied to land. So back to farmland or rehabilitation sites, they'll use this fertilizer from food waste once it's gone through the decomposition process and the energy is captured. So these facilities are popping up all over Australia. And there's a lot of government funding for them at the moment, purely because of the need at a national level to, increase the amount of food waste that we're able to process. So there's a number in Sydney, there's a number in Melbourne and the surrounding suburbs, and etc. for each state. The problem really is for regional areas at the moment, where there isn't the infrastructure, or the distance is too far for trucks to be able to service businesses with food waste, where they can't justify the length of time they have to drive to pick up some food waste. And that's where the legislation in New South Wales doesn't apply in some areas, because it's not a feasible avenue for businesses just yet. But that's where opportunities, and we did a grant with the Shoalhaven Council, which is south of Kiama, sort of Ulladulla region. And a lot of that was linking businesses with farmers and who actually would want the food waste to be able to, feed their pigs or whatever, their compost farms, or linking them to community gardens that have a real big composting focus. So metropolitan, there's a lot of these facilities popping up, but regional areas, there's a bit of a way to go.
Yeah, because obviously got smaller wastewater networks as well, so smaller treatment plants, and not always with all the, like you said, the anaerobic digestion and stuff like that. Sorry, I'm ex-Sydney Water.
Yeah,
no, I was going to say, you're very knowledgeable. We should have had you facilitating this.
Sorry. No, well, actually, I'm a trade waste officer as well, so it's interesting they've been talking about the FOGO coming through, and so I posted the grant thing for the EPA.
Yeah, I just had a look at that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, all good. But it's really good to see that I've noticed I'm in Western Sydney area that we're getting a lot more sorting of like you said, the packaging and the PFAS has been a big issue because, like you said, if that ends up in compostable stuff, then we can't necessarily break it down and reuse that product again. So, yeah.
It's a big issue. Like the Sydney Water late last year released a warning saying that there was dangerous levels of PFAS in our water. Like it's a big concern, and hence sort of why the EPA in New South Wales and Victoria just blanket banned compostable packaging from now, because if it is being composted and then sold back to farmers, the compost to then apply back to our food system, we want that compost to be as clean as possible, so that we're not then eating it. So yeah.
Well, we are I'm just conscious of time. So before we go into another question, Mike, how do people make contact with you if they're wanting to continue the conversation and learn a little bit more about what you do at Edge Impact?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to put my contact details as a follow-up in the email with some of the information and the resources, the slide pack I can share as well. And I've got our contact details at the bottom of the deck. But an email or a phone call, always happy to answer and help where I can. And then, as Sharon mentioned, there's a lot of business-related grants that are being released by different state governments to try and help, fund these participation partnerships, solution-oriented grants where businesses like Edge can help small businesses in whatever way we can. So email's probably the best way to start.
Well, thank you for that. And I guess just to wrap this up, in terms of the RCA members, what is it that they can do to help support your goal, like your mission, and what your goals are?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've done is we have pulled together some resources, ones for hospitality teams and ones for the owners, where basically it tries to step out what we're really trying to focus here, and that's trying to reduce food waste and unnecessary waste. So we're really trying to look at food waste here, just because it is such a problematic area from an environmental, social, and also economic point of view for a business, and really trying to focus on that. So these resources will be up on the page, and that's probably the best place to start, I think. And if there are questions that you're uncertain of, you can always come and ask. But I think we've tried to include as much information in these resources as possible, and really trying to focus on the key areas that we are keen to try and resolve. And at the end of each of the resources, there's a page that includes more information that you can go to, whether it's around waste signage, guidance around food waste avoidance, these types of things. We've included that as well. So I think if the first point of call would really, once these are live, to jump on, have a look, see if they're applicable to your business, start implementing some of the initiatives that we're suggesting, and try and record the successes if there are any, and feed them back to us.
That's fantastic. So the pages that Mike is referring to is the RCA website, but I will send a link to everybody that has registered for today's webinar as well, so that you get access to these resources. They're hot off the press. They've just only launched, so we will have them up live later today, and I will send all of you an email with the link to be able to find them on our website. But on that note, Thank you. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining what is a really important topic. And our industry can definitely do a whole lot more in terms of our on what our responsibility is in terms of lowering food waste and also in terms of adding more money back into your business just through taking some really simple actions to make that happen. So Mike, it's been a privilege, and I thank you so much for putting together that presentation, which was really interesting.
Of course, anytime. Glad to be here. And yeah, if you do have any questions, please reach out and let us know how those resources go when they are live, and if you have any feedback.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and we look forward to announcing our next webinar in the next coming week. Take care until next time.